everybody. Welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Our guest today is Ethan Wieselthier. He received his master's degree in IO psychology from Hofstra University and currently works as a director of talent development for RGA. Welcome, Ethan. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Honor.
Brandon and I were just talking before you hopped on. We haven't really talked about talent development thoroughly, I think, since we started this in February, and maybe so it was a month after, it was March, and then we briefly touched on it a little bit. So we're just excited to kind of get a whole nother talent development episode because it's such a big part of IO and what we learn, and we just haven't covered it enough. So we're excited to see what you have to hear or listen.
Yeah. I mean, talent development, it goes a lot of different ways, especially the size of your organization and the resources you have. So you could be a large organization that has internal facilitators, experts, people who are creating content. It could be, but then there's the other side, which I would say we fall more on because we are 1,200 people. We've had more before, but generally a mid-sized agency, and our resources, while we used to put them to creating content, it wasn't great for scale and a lot of use of our efforts. So then it's the other side where it's really curating content and creating that. Well, maybe that's why we buy into always on learning and continuous learning, because we need to lean into that more because we just can't own it as much.
You know, you're talking about all of this work and talent and everything, and I kind of want to take a step back in your career and start with the consulting side that you worked at E. Rogers, which is, for our listeners, is a very, very boutique consulting firm. I would say it's a prestigious one, specifically at Hofstra. Everybody looks at working with Evelyn in such a high...
It's the known one.
Yeah. But so having that experience and working with Evelyn, how did that prepare you for the career in talent development?
Yeah. My time at E. Rogers influenced me a lot. When I was there, and it was 1 year, but in that year, I was building competency models. I was supporting executive coaching. We were doing some strategic planning for nonprofits and conducting 360 feedback. So the whole process, the technical piece, and then also creating reports and all. And it's really, first off, a wide range in experience early on in my career. And it helped me kind of connect the different things that I liked, which is I'm certainly a systems thinker from this. When I learned about competency models and how that can impact the rest of the strategy of an organization and for performance management, for talent development, leadership development, and the impact that can have, and just creating guidance and alignment on expectations. But then seeing the supporting people one-on-one, which is I didn't think I was a systems person. I liked working with people individually. That was part of what in, psychology, there's the research and studies side, but there's also just impact on the individual. So then doing executive coaching or 360 feedback and creating those reports, I saw the range and how things can connect from competency models to 360 feedback. So it really influenced me a lot. And then from there, and please, I will ramble. But from there, I feel then at at RGA, where I've been for almost 9.5 years, it's helped me connect a lot of the work that we do over the years to other projects or ways that we need to improve, because I've seen it across several different organizations just from E. Rogers.
Right.
So it sounds like you did a whole wide range of thing at E. Rogers. And I know talent development's a big field. Is that the same sort of thing when you work in talent development? Do you have that many things going on in 1 week? And I shouldn't even just say projects, but just types of tasks that you're doing. Does it range that much?
I personally do. And that goes to size of team and scope of work and other organizations. talent development might just be a center of excellence, might just be learning and development, and that's all they focus on, which is fine. I mean, I'm sure they do it really well because that's what they're doing. Whereas I'm on a small team. I mean, for our 1,200 people globally, at most we were a 4 or 5 person team, and
Wow.
and at the moment we're a 2 to 3 person team.
Oh no.
It's challenging. There's opportunity, huge opportunity there, but it is challenging. That's the balance that I find, at least, well, I find challenges of like, I want to make everything better, but there's only so much time and resources to focus on each thing. So it's incremental in some areas and picking battles in others. And oftentimes, this is veering off your question, but like oftentimes I've created so many project plans and decks that like were put on a shelf, but that I've come back to. I mean, I've fortunately been here for many years. So a couple years later, it's like, finally, now's the time. And like waiting for that time. It was frustrating in the moment, but now I'm like, all right, let's dust this off. Let me update it with like the current perspective, but the solution still applies. But you were mentioning like, how am I doing today? So I do talent development, organizing workshops and learning activities, managing just resources for our staff. My role has grown over the years. That's where it started. Then I took on performance management, and so revamped our whole program and how our strategy and process there, brought in new tools, and have been running that for the last 4 to 5 years. I've also added on like surveys, employee listening, organizational effectiveness, which is, I really like that because I love the data. I love that being able to have that research and tie that into the other work that I'm doing.
True IO person right there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. For me, we're going through our engagements, or analyzing our engagement survey now, and for me, I'm like just waiting for us to not just present this insights, but to be able to use it to move other work that I do forward in performance management, talent development, or leadership development. So,
it's so funny you answered my question in that, because I was about to ask what the tie was to performance management with the work you're doing. But I want to circle back to what you were saying with the tasks and working at E. Rogers and how it applied to what you're doing now. I had a presentation that I gave in class with Joe, and the presentation was talking about being a consultant. And I work in consulting as well, but I used that SpongeBob meme where he has like 10 different hands and they're all doing 10 different things.
Yes.
And based off of how you're talking about what you did at E. Rogers and now what you're doing in talent development, it sounds like that skill was like one of those transferable things that came over to your work, right?
Absolutely. There's like understanding how to bring the consulting perspective to work. And when you're the only IO someplace, you can't just come in like, bull in a china shop, like knocking everything around. Like you have to sit back, listen, and like figure out how to speak their language and focus there. But then when it comes to, competency models, I've been pushing, we need to establish greater expectations. It's something we've known for years that we need to do. This is one of those things that like I years ago created something, then have had to like dust it off. But like finally now we're there. And my experience with seeing how it was done at E. Rogers, I'm not an expert in it. I don't do it every day. It's not something I'm always doing, but I know how it can work, how it can connect. And I also, because of that, got certified in Talent Intelligence, which is it's a framework, KPI framework that provides that. If it's 360 feedback, our leaders, we weren't doing 360 feedback. They weren't getting feedback, but it came up. And so I was like, okay, this is how you do 360 feedback. This is the process. I knew how to get it, move it along. I knew how to track it all. And then creating a report, I had done this already for a client. I knew the art and science of it, of looking at the data and being able to come to the conclusions to help connect the the report, the findings, the feedback to that leader's day-to-day work and make sure that it was relevant for them. And so I use that to make a template at RGA that we've been using for the last 3 to 4 years. And so it's but 3 to 4 years. I started 9.5 years ago, so it took time to get there, but it came back around, and I'm going back through things all the time. And even just like past experience or past knowledge, like I sometimes, and maybe I should I do stay up on the current research. I do a lot of reading as a practitioner to do that. It's important, but I'll go back to my textbooks from Hofstra and like org development and certain interventions, like team interventions, just to be like, what's like an idea of like what I can do in this situation, like how I can, it's not taking it straight off the page, but how can I, set up this discussion that we're going to have, and what are like the points? How do I need to move them around, or maybe like group certain questions and so forth. So I will do it mainly around org development textbook. I definitely open that up.
I'm glad you get to look at like your past stuff and like use it in your work now. It's nice for us students to hear.
Yeah, I listen. How many people are doing that? I don't know. I think it's really valuable. I think it is because even I guess I like to stay in like the org development space, but there's so much around change management now and org development and this systems and understanding, trying to communicate like what are the drivers, what are the different factors that impact an organization. And I will go back to that, one day, that one presentation that Dr. Nolan gave for our org development class, that just we went through several different models, and just to like be like, some of them are quite complicated to bring in. I usually just reference the like STAR model for change, but I use that all the time to try and explain that one intervention in one direction is not going to create sustainable change. But I have to always go back to that deck and find the image to make, or is there like a different one that I can use that applies?
So now, like you're saying this, and I want to correct or make sure that I heard this correctly. You are the only IO on your team, correct?
Yes.
So you're probably having to try and sell a lot of this a lot more in your day-to-day life.
I am, absolutely. I fortunately have a manager who is a great champion and a great seller and definitely elevates me and my ideas for sure. But yeah, it's I think that's one of the keys to all this, and I'm still learning how to do it better, is taking what we learned, the language we use, the complexity. Like, I think we understand how different, it's a little easier for us to see how different interventions or aspects about the work environment can influence other ones, or even like motivating individuals. Taking that and having to translate it into the language and the situation and what's going to motivate leaders to act on it, what's going to make sense to them. Because often we're like, we can just throw a lot of information. We could want to throw a lot of information. We could want to throw a lot of numbers, and so forth. And in the end, depending on who the leader is, it could just be a big headline that says, this is what the data is saying, this is all you need to know, and a couple quotes that from employees that persuades them. Others want to see data, but you have to, that's knowing your audience, but it is, it's learning how to translate that is important. A lot of that is a storytelling. There's a lot of different words, presentations, but I think storytelling is the right way to go about it.
Yeah, we've definitely heard that word storytelling, I feel like, come up a lot in the recent year, just in the IO space. And I also want to kind of piggyback off what Brandon said, and then kind of join it with the point that you said earlier about having to like sort of like sometimes petition for like these IO things that we learn and to try to implement them into companies. And then you were also describing a bit before about like 360 feedbacks, and you said your company didn't do like a 360 feedback before. How does that kind of implementation go? Do you generally find that people are like, oh wow, this is awesome, like why haven't we been doing this before? Or are people coming to you and be like, what are you doing, like we don't want to do this, and then you have to like help try to explain how it might be beneficial? Like, is there, what does that look like?
It is often, it's not necessarily we don't want to do that. It's like we can't, or maybe the solution just feels a little too overwhelming or not in the right place. I remember one of my, this was back in like 2015, so I was like at RJ for a year, and we were just creating a mentorship program. It was just creating it, and I was doing all this research, and I created, in my mind at the time, the best practice mentorship program. I had everything. It was going to be great. And I showed my manager, and he was just like, this is never going to work. And I was, what do you mean? What do you mean it's not going to work? Like this, you got to do this. You have to do this. Like, this is how it all. And it was a really great learning, because it helped me realize, like, I need to take a moment and understand, how does this organization work? What are people's time commitments like? How do they talk to people or interact? Like, we have such a pressure on time and people and doing things outside of their like day-to-day work. Like, all that we were asking was a lot. Or even just like to track it. I wanted people to like go to a spreadsheet and like or a form and check it off. Nobody did that. Nobody did that. Right? Like, I had all these ideas, and it takes, create your idea, but you need to, but know that that's not what it's going to look like. I think it's really about listening to the feedback of others who maybe know more. Maybe those are leaders, people who are in the rooms and in the conversations. And I don't want to say like, it could be picking what what battles to take. I don't like thinking of it as battles. Or sacrifices. It's working in, how does this best practice end up? What's really important? What's the outcome that you're shooting for? And how do you work that into the system that you're trying to do? Because often I feel like our solutions come from a great place, but it's like adding something that doesn't necessarily just fit within the organization. And it's figuring out, how can you do that?
It's so funny too, because like the running joke with all IOs is it depends. And I feel like what you just said there, Ethan, is such a great example of, we learn all of these things that are so great, but you have to make sure that you're putting them in the right circumstances. Mm-hmm. And so when you got to your time at RGA, after all of your experience at E. Rogers and after your experience at Hofstra, it's like, okay, I've learned all of this great material. It's like, but which parts of this are going to affect the current business that I'm working in right now? And how is it going to help everybody? And it seems like what you're saying here is that as you kind of acclimate and get into the business, you're able to kind of acknowledge that even more as you like build your career. Is that kind of how you felt?
Yeah. And between that and you hopefully are building your own credibility too. So people, you can push things in different ways. I can tell you, I do surveys or even just like measuring effectiveness of things. And it kills me. It would kill me when someone would tell me like, this needs to be 5 questions, or like no more than 10 questions. And they want to know the world of information. And I would be like, that just cannot happen. And I think early on, well, I made it happen because I picked and choose. I said, these are the ones that are going to fit into that box, because I didn't have that credibility. And I was eventually like, okay, I need to do that. But over time, I think it's okay, well, we did it that way, and this is what we learned. And okay, the next time we do it, recognize like, we actually need to expand. We need to do it a different way. And so I think that the iteration even is probably the way that I get through it most, is trying to do my best on that first version, that pilot, and knowing that there's an opportunity to collect feedback, to recognize, identify what worked and what didn't, and then be able to bring probably, I think on that like version 2.0, maybe a bit more of my perspective, because I was probably the one who was running it. I was the one who was seeing the data. And now that we tried it that way, this is how we need to move it to get it better.
It's an interesting point of like trying to find that like middle point of like simplicity and like functionality, and like, do I want to make it super simple but like it won't help me a lot, or do I want to have all this stuff and then but like who wants to fill this out because like I don't even know what's going on.
Our engagement survey, I brought in 2017 was our first one. We worked with Culture Amp, their platform and consultants that we work with. They're fantastic. They got a whole team of IOs. We started with their template. Over years, between leaders wanting to learn more things and myself being like, oh yeah, let's add this. Let's make sure there's more questions on DEI or well-being. Like, it became enormous. People have completed it, but analyzing this data became such a hassle. Didn't know, it lost focus. And, in me, over time, like I have a real heart. I'm a hoarder. I just like want all this information. And I think when I see a question, there were so many questions that were similar, and I see it and I'm like, well, this has a slightly different angle to it. So I want to like know that. It was too much. And so like the last year, finally, I wanted to do this for 2 years, but the last year we went through and finally got rid of, at least like combed through and got rid of things that just weren't serving. And I thought that they were. I thought they were helping, but it actually wasn't. And so it's like we're all always learning and moving in different directions. I think knowing that, or hopefully that, if you're in a safe, secure environment where you can try something and know that you're going to have another opportunity to make it better. You may not. The first time may be when you need to prove that it can work, but it's got to be good enough that you can prove that this is a positive step, and then you can make it better. You're going to have failures. You're going to have things that don't work.
Ethan, this has been so great because I feel like you're giving such a great perspective for students who are like entering the workforce and are trying to figure out how all of this material that they're learning is going to be transferable. And the process in doing it sometimes is an uphill battle. And that's demonstrated through some of the experiences that you've had, some of the experience like our past guests have had. One thing I wanted to ask you, and kind of leading us into the question we ask all of our guests, is one piece of advice that you do have for prospective IO students out there, or students who are entering the IO world. What is one piece of advice that you would have for them based off of your experience?
Yeah, I think my experience, as you've heard through all this, I have gone a lot of different directions. I have a pretty broad experience at RGA and E. Rogers. And I think what it's shown me, and what I would say, is that like our degree is so versatile that you can go out and explore. I think early on, I remember when I was searching for my first job, I was like, I don't know if I want to be a generalist. And I was like, talent development, I can tell you, learning and development was not necessarily on my list. I don't know what I was looking for. I really didn't. And I think that the advice I would give is to explore, is to give things opportunities. If you're an HR generalist role, might read on paper the same everywhere, and it may not sound so exciting. It may sound exciting. Hey, I don't want to put it down, but it may, you may not seem as interested in. However, that role at that company, until you interview or get in there, it's going to be unique there. It's going to have its own challenges. It's going to have its own opportunities, and the environment could really lift you in a certain direction and show you what you're interested in. Versus another place, which it will be very different. So it's not the same everywhere. And I think that exploring to find your place, like I said, learning and development was not on my list. This was actually the only L&D job that I applied for when I was looking. And fortunately through networking and all, got it. It was tough, but at first I was applying to HR generalist and it wasn't too inspired. But through this, I have done, as you heard, org development, I've done leadership development, I've done performance management, and that's in this one role I've been fortunate to. But I think I could have done surveying, and then been like, this is great. I like this. I didn't even know I was going to have this opportunity. It took some time to get there, and then I can move. So it's pretty versatile. I had and I'll just keep going. But I had I have a psych and marketing background. I originally psychology, picked up marketing. Very interested in market research. I had no idea that IOs, because of our research background, could go into market research.
Right.
It wasn't what I was considering when I was going to IO, but I discovered in my second year when people were doing internships, and I was already committed to mine. I didn't even know, but I like research, and I'm actually at a marketing agency. It kind of aligned and clicked, but I've liked it, and it just shows that how versatile it is, because you could be doing research, you could be doing I don't know, going into coaching and supporting people one-on-ones, or being an HR generalist or a business partner going in that direction. Eventually it leads to strategic work. You could be doing surveys and research there. You could be doing consulting or org development. And there's so also like work internal in a company, consulting. There's so many tools and vendors now too. Like that's another option to go. Like I mentioned Culture Amp. They have a whole team of consultants that are all IOs. There are several Hofstra alum who are there. Like people are being hired by vendors to be consultants there, or help with their products even. And so I think that, again, the tip is explore. There's a lot of versatility out there, and you don't need to know right away. I think that's let your situation and all not dictate that, but influence you. You'll learn on the job.
Yeah, it's great advice, especially as like when you're incoming master's students. It's easy to just be like, I'm going to do external consulting and I'm going to work for this industry, and then kind of just like narrow yourself down that path and then like only focus on those aspects of those jobs. But as you say, and as we say on this podcast a lot, your degree is so versatile. You could do so many different things. And the more and more we hear people talk, they started in one thing and ended up in another that ended up being a job that they love so much.
I get a lot of, I love the breadth of my job, but for me, what ends up engaging me the most is the impact I have on the people that work the organization. I'm happy that I've been here long enough to see change, and I enjoy the days I go into the office. I mainly work from home, but I enjoy the day because it connects me to that work, and I found that was meaningful to me. So I really, when I think about what my role might be, I don't want to be like totally behind the scenes. I want to interact with people. I was at E. Rogers. I left there. I did not want to do consulting. That's what I learned. I enjoyed the breadth, but the business development side of it, that hustle, it didn't fit me, at least at that time. So I think that it is right. Like you just don't know until you're there and learning.
Yeah. And I can speak to that too. I'm doing consulting and learning similarly that consulting might not be the way that I want to go, but it's given me a lot of tools that I can utilize as I move forward in my career. As Ethan, you showed so well for your career. I think there were so many, to piggyback off of what Joe was saying, I think that you gave so many good pieces of advice. And if I also wanted to call out another thing, there is not just like the versatility of the degree, but also just the versatility of experience, like the idea of transferable skills. I wanted to kind of like add that is like, even if I were to hop into an HR generalist role, and you were kind of speaking to this, at every company, it's a little bit different. And hopping into that role at another company can give you experience and maybe talent that you wouldn't have expected if you were somewhere else. And I mean, that's kind of just goes to show you what you're doing in talent development right now could be completely different than something that Joe or I would be doing somewhere else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all circumstances. I even I had a business partner who I was working with, right? My environment went to another company, and that company had just been acquired. And the situation there was, generally they probably are hiring somebody that could handle this, but the situation was they were merging these cultures and processes. That's a whole world. And if that for you clicks and you're like, wow, this is awesome, maybe you're like, mergers and acquisitions. Let's do it. Like, that's what I do. That's what I enjoy. I'm going to look for that next situation. Or maybe there's plenty of consultants who are doing just that. So it could, who knows? I think that, yeah, absolutely.
No, so as you said, we could do so many different things. Hopefully, some master students can take this advice, because I wish I knew it back in undergrad and not just down one path. But I'm very glad that we got to talk about talent development today. As we said at the beginning, like, it's not something we got to talk about a lot. And I think after this episode, we're going to try to talk about it a bit more. Because just learning from what you said, there's so many things that you could do under talent development that even really I didn't know. So thank you for your advice. We appreciate it.
Yeah, advice and information. We definitely need to have you back on and do a deep dive into the different areas of talent development that you've gone into. There were so many fun ones that we didn't even get to touch on.
I'd be happy to. Absolutely.
Well, we'll have to keep in contact. But thank you for joining us today, Ethan. We appreciate it.
Thank you. That was a great episode with Ethan. I feel like as a student sitting and listening to that, I forgot we were doing a podcast for a second. I just wanted him to keep going. That was so informational.
Yeah, we like, as we said, we haven't got to talk a lot about talent development. I think we discussed it. I know we discussed it with Alan Church. Who were the other two? We talked a little bit of Taylor and Deeksha. And then I was like, wow, it's like been a while since we touched a field that covers a large part of IO, especially like all the different tests. So it was really nice to like hear what he gets to do on a day to day.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool because a lot of the stuff that he said was referring to material we're learning in class at the moment, or we've been learning about. So it's like very, very relevant to us, and it felt really empowering. Almost like, okay, we know what we're doing now, at least we have an idea of how we're going to start utilizing these things.
Yeah, like what he brought up, he's like, sometimes I go back to the textbook, Dr. Nolan's class. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try that. I was like, oh, wait, it's like, of course we know we're in a good program, but it's just nice to hear that you're actually utilizing some of the stuff that we've learned, or they've learned, and we are learning right now.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just so cool to hear that and get to speak to people who are alum of our program and see them doing so many great and amazing things. It was really awesome getting to talk with Ethan. But we just want to thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you got just as much value out of this episode that we did, and we will catch you guys next week. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.